My name is James Carter. I'm 32 years old, and I used to believe that trust was the foundation of every meaningful relationship. I worked as a senior project manager at a software development company in downtown Chicago, earning a solid six-figure salary that allowed me to live comfortably in a Lincoln Park condo. My life seemed like something out of a perfect American dream. I was about to marry Megan Thompson, the woman I thought was my soulmate. And my relationship with my father, Richard Carter, was everything a son could want. He was my hero, my mentor, and the man who taught me that integrity was worth more than any paycheck. My father, Richard, was 60 years old, a respected real estate broker who had built his reputation over 3 decades in the Chicago market. He and my mother, Margaret, had been married for 35 years, and their relationship was the gold standard I measured all others against. Richard was the kind of man who still opened doors for women, who kept his word no matter what, and who had never missed a single one of my baseball games growing up. When I introduced him to Megan 2 years ago, he welcomed her into our family with open arms, treating her like the daughter he never had. Megan Thompson, 30 years old, worked as a marketing coordinator for a boutique firm in River North. She was intelligent, beautiful, and shared my love for weekend trips to Wisconsin and deep dish pizza debates. We met at a mutual friend's 4th of July barbecue in 2022, and I knew within 3 months that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. She got along perfectly with my parents, often joining us for Sunday dinners and holiday celebrations. My mother, Margaret, adored her, and my father, Richard, would always comment on how lucky I was to have found such a wonderful woman. Everything was falling into place perfectly. Our wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in October at St. Michael's Church in Old Town, followed by a reception at the Chicago History Museum. We had sent out invitations to 150 guests, including family, friends, and colleagues. I had spent months planning every detail, from the vintage bourbon bar to the jazz trio that would play during dinner. My best man was my college roommate from Northwestern, Matt, and Megan's sister, Samantha, was her maid of honor. The rehearsal dinner was booked at Gibson Steakhouse, and we had already put down a deposit on a honeymoon suite in Maui. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. The night before our wedding, I was staying at the Palmer House Hotel with my father, going over the final details of the ceremony. My mother and Megan were at a different hotel with the bridesmaids, following the old tradition of not seeing each other before the wedding. Richard and I had ordered room service and were sitting at the small table in my suite, reviewing the timeline for the next day. He was helping me with the seating chart, making sure all the relatives from both sides would be comfortable. It was one of those perfect father-son moments that I thought we'd be sharing for many years to come. Around 10:30 p.m., my father excused himself to use the restroom, leaving his iPhone unlocked on the table beside his coffee cup. I wasn't trying to snoop, but when a text message notification popped up on his screen, my eyes naturally glanced over. What I saw made my blood run cold and changed everything I thought I knew about the 2 people I trusted most in the world. The message was from Megan, sent at 10:28 p.m. It read, "Thank you for the unforgettable night, Richard. The way your lips explored every part of me won't leave my mind. I can't wait for the next time. You're incredible. P.S. Our story will be our secret." Attached to the message was a photo that left no room for doubt or misinterpretation. It was a clear, intimate picture of the 2 of them together in what looked like a hotel room, taken just the night before. In that single moment, my entire world collapsed. The woman I was supposed to marry in less than 12 hours had been sleeping with my own father. The man I had looked up to my entire life had betrayed not only me, but also my mother, who was probably at that very moment helping Megan get ready for what she thought would be the happiest day of her son's life. I sat there, staring at that phone screen, feeling like I was having an out-of-body experience. My hands were shaking, but my mind was surprisingly clear. This wasn't some drunk mistake or moment of weakness. The timestamp on the photo metadata showed it was taken at 11:47 p.m. the previous night, which meant they had planned this while I was at my bachelor party with my groomsmen at Wrigley Field, watching the Cubs lose to the Cardinals and toasting to my future happiness. When my father returned from the bathroom, I'd already taken several photos of his phone screen with my own device. Years of working in software development had taught me the importance of documentation and backup systems. I managed to keep my voice steady as I told him I was exhausted and needed to get some sleep before the big day. He patted my shoulder and said, "Get some rest, son. Tomorrow is going to be the best day of your life." The irony was almost unbearable. After Richard left for his own room, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the full weight of the betrayal sink in. I thought about all the times over the past few months when I had noticed small things that didn't quite add up. Megan had been working late more frequently, claiming her marketing firm was landing bigger clients. My father had been taking more business trips to Milwaukee, saying the real estate market there was heating up. There had been knowing glances between them at family dinners, inside jokes that seemed to exclude everyone else, and a new perfume that Megan wore that my father had complimented a little too enthusiastically. I had dismissed all of these red flags because I trusted them completely. In my line of work, I was trained to spot anomalies in code, to identify patterns that didn't belong. But when it came to my personal life, I had been blind to the most obvious bug in my system. The betrayal wasn't just about the physical act. It was about the calculated deception, the elaborate lies, and the fact that they had been planning to let me walk down that aisle completely oblivious to the truth. Instead of calling off the wedding immediately or confronting them in a fit of rage, I made a decision that would define everything that followed. I was going to let them think they had gotten away with it, right up until the moment when I would expose them in front of everyone who mattered to them. My background in project management had taught me that the best solutions required careful planning and perfect execution. I spent the next 3 hours preparing my strategy. First, I uploaded the photos from my father's phone to a secure cloud server that I controlled. Then, I created a simple web page with the images and the text message thread, making sure it was hosted on a reliable server that could handle high traffic. I generated a QR code that would direct anyone who scanned it to this web page and designed it to look innocuous, like it might be a link to our wedding photos or a digital guest book. Using the hotel's business center, I printed 200 small cards with a QR code and a message that read, "Scan for a special surprise from the bride and groom." I knew that, in today's digital age, wedding guests were always eager to see behind-the-scenes content, especially if they thought they were getting exclusive access to something special. The cards looked professional and legitimate, exactly the kind of thing modern couples include in their wedding favors. Next, I called Rachel Evans, my attorney. Even though it was nearly 2 a.m., Rachel had handled my real estate transactions and business contract for years, and she was someone I could trust completely. She answered on the third ring and, despite the late hour, listened carefully as I explained the situation. "James," she said, "I'm so sorry this happened to you, but I'm glad you're thinking clearly. Don't sign any marriage documents tomorrow, obviously. As for the rest, what you're planning is perfectly legal. It's your property, your evidence, and your wedding. You have every right to share information about your own life." Rachel also advised me to document everything with timestamps and to make sure I had witnesses to the events that would unfold. She offered to attend the wedding as my legal representative, positioning herself discreetly among the guests in case things got complicated. "Sometimes," she said, "the best revenge is simply the truth. And sometimes the truth is more devastating than any elaborate scheme." I barely slept that night, but when morning came, I felt strangely calm. I showered, put on my custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo, and looked at myself in the mirror. The man staring back at me looked composed, even dignified. I had spent years building my reputation as someone who could handle pressure, who could solve complex problems under tight deadlines, and who always delivered results. Today would be the ultimate test of those skills. At the church, everything proceeded exactly as planned. The flowers were perfect, the music was beautiful, and the guests were arriving in their finest attire. My mother, Margaret, looked radiant in her navy blue dress, completely unaware that her world was about to shatter. My father, Richard, was playing his role as the proud father of the groom, shaking hands with guests, making small talk about the weather and the Bears' upcoming season. Megan arrived in a classic white gown that had cost $8,000, looking every bit the blushing bride. She kissed my cheek and whispered, I can't wait to be your wife." The audacity of her performance was breathtaking. She had been in bed with my father less than 36 hours earlier, and now she was standing at the altar, ready to pledge her eternal love and fidelity to me in front of God and everyone we knew. As we stood at the altar, I could see my father in the front row, wearing his best suit and a smile that now looked like a mask to me. He caught my eye and gave me a thumbs up, the same gesture he had made when I graduated from Northwestern, when I got my first promotion, and when I told him I was going to propose to Megan. The hypocrisy was staggering, but I maintained my composure. Everything was going according to plan. Father Mitchell began the ceremony with the traditional opening words, and I could feel the weight of 150 pairs of eyes on us. The guests included my entire extended family, Megan's relatives from Wisconsin, colleagues from both our companies, and friends we had made over the years. My college roommate, Matt, was standing beside me as my best man, completely oblivious to what was about to unfold. Megan's sister, Samantha, was her maid of honor, beaming with pride at her sister's apparent happiness. During the first part of the ceremony, I had arranged for my trusted wedding coordinator, Jessica, to begin distributing the QR code cards to the guests. Jessica had worked dozens of weddings at St. Michael's and was known for her discretion and professionalism. I had told her the cards were a surprise element for the reception, and she had agreed to hand them out quietly during the ceremony. The timing was perfect because most guests would be curious enough to scan the code immediately, but polite enough to keep their phones on silent mode. I watched out of the corner of my eye as Jessica moved through the pews, handing cards to small groups of guests. Uncle Fred from Milwaukee scanned his immediately, and I saw his face change from curiosity to confusion to horror in about 10 seconds. My cousin Julia looked at her phone screen and covered her mouth with her hand. My boss from a software company, Daniel, went pale and showed his screen to his wife, who gasped audibly. The ripple effect was fascinating to observe. Within minutes, nearly every guest in the church had their phone out, and the atmosphere began to shift palpably. There were whispered conversations, shocked expressions, and people passing their phones to others who hadn't received cards yet. The evidence was spreading through the congregation like wildfire, but the ceremony continued. Father Mitchell was in the middle of his homily about love and trust when I noticed Megan's Aunt Carol showing her phone to Megan's mother, who let out a small cry before covering her mouth with her handkerchief. My mother, Margaret, was sitting in the front row, and when my cousin handed her a card, I watched her scan it with the same curious smile she had worn moments before. The smile disappeared instantly, replaced by an expression of pure devastation that I will never forget. Megan was still facing forward, focused on the priest's words about sacred vows and eternal commitment. She hadn't noticed the growing chaos behind her. My father, Richard, was beginning to look uncomfortable as he saw people around him checking their phones and whispering urgently to each other. He leaned over to my mother and whispered something, but she pulled away from him sharply, her face now streaked with tears. The moment I had been waiting for finally arrived. Father Mitchell reached the traditional part of the ceremony where he asks if anyone objects to the union. If any person can show just cause why James and Megan may not be joined together in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. I stepped forward and took the microphone from the priest. The church fell completely silent, except for the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears. I looked directly at Megan, then at my father, then at the congregation filled with people who had just seen the evidence of their betrayal. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I have something to say." Megan turned to face me, and I could see the exact moment when she realized that something was very wrong. Her face went from confusion to recognition to pure terror as she noticed the expressions of the guests behind her. My father, Richard, half stood from his seat, his face now red with panic as he understood that his secret was no longer secret. "I loved you, Megan," I continued, speaking directly to her. "I loved you with everything I had. And Dad," I turned to face him, "I looked up to you my entire life. You were my hero, my role model, the man who taught me about integrity and honor." The church was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. Even the children had stopped fidgeting. Everyone was hanging on my every word, and I could feel the weight of the moment. But the most intimate betrayal demands the highest price, I said, my voice still calm, but carrying the full weight of my pain and anger. Last night, I discovered that the two people I trusted most in the world have been lying to me, betraying me, and planning to let me walk down this aisle completely unaware of their deception. Megan tried to speak, but no words came out. My father was now standing, his hands shaking as he tried to figure out how to salvage the situation. My mother, Margaret, was sobbing openly, not just from the betrayal, but from the public humiliation that was unfolding in front of everyone she knew. The evidence is clear and undeniable, I continued. And since both of you chose to make a mockery of this sacred ceremony, I thought it was only fitting that the truth be revealed in the same public forum where you plan to complete your deception. I gestured to the congregation, where nearly everyone was now holding their phones, having seen the explicit messages and photos that proved the affair beyond any doubt. The proof was irrefutable, time-stamped and devastating in its clarity. This wedding is over, I announced. And so is our relationship, both of them. The chaos that erupted was unlike anything I had ever witnessed. Guests were shouting questions. Megan was crying hysterically, and my father was trying to push through the crowd to reach me. But I was already walking down the aisle, my head held high, leaving behind the two people who had destroyed my trust and my family. I walked out of St. Michael's Church and into the crisp October air, feeling a strange sense of liberation that I hadn't expected. Behind me, I could hear the chaos continuing to unfold. Megan was sobbing hysterically, my father was trying to shout explanations that nobody wanted to hear, and my mother was being comforted by her sister. The guests were streaming out of the church, some following me with expressions of support, others gathering in small groups to discuss what they had just witnessed. My best man, Matt, caught up with me on the steps of the church. "Jesus Christ, James," he said, still processing what had happened. "I can't believe they did that to you. How are you holding up?" I looked at him and realized that, for the first time in months, I felt completely honest about my situation. "I'm better than I've been in a long time," I told him. "The truth has a way of setting you free, even when it hurts." Within hours, the story had spread far beyond the walls of St. Michael's Church. Several guests had shared the evidence on social media, and by Sunday evening, the story was trending on Twitter and Facebook. The local Chicago news stations picked it up by Monday morning, and by Tuesday, I was fielding calls for national media outlets wanting to interview me about the wedding that had gone viral for all the wrong reasons. I declined most of the interview requests, but did speak with one reporter from the Chicago Tribune who had covered business stories about my company in the past. I kept my comments brief and dignified. "I believe in the truth," I said, "and I believe that people have a right to know who they're really dealing with, especially when it comes to matters of trust and integrity." The professional consequences for Megan and my father were swift and severe. Megan's marketing firm, which prided itself on family values and ethical business practices, terminated her employment within a week. The story had become so widely known that having her associated with their brand was seen as a liability. My father's real estate business suffered even more dramatically. In an industry built entirely on trust and personal relationships, his reputation was essentially destroyed overnight. Several major clients canceled their contracts, and his business partner of 15 years dissolved their partnership. My mother, Margaret, filed for divorce within 2 weeks of the wedding incident. She had been married to my father for 35 years, but she told me that the public humiliation and the violation of trust were too much to overcome. "I could have maybe forgiven a private affair," she said during one of our long conversations. "But the fact that he was willing to destroy his own son's life, and that he planned to let you marry her, knowing what they had done, that's something I can never forgive." The legal proceedings were handled efficiently by Rachel Evans, who had prepared for this exact scenario. Since the marriage had never been legally completed, there were no divorce proceedings necessary between Megan and me. However, there were financial matters to resolve. I had paid for most of the wedding expenses, including the venue, catering, and honeymoon reservations. While I couldn't recover all of the money, Rachel was able to negotiate settlements that covered a significant portion of my losses. More importantly, Rachel helped me protect my assets and ensure that Megan had no legal claim to any of my property or savings. The prenuptial agreement we had signed was ironclad, but since the marriage never occurred, it was essentially meaningless anyway. What mattered was that I was completely free to start over without any financial entanglements. The aftermath wasn't easy, but it was cleaner than I had expected. I took 2 weeks off from work to process everything that had happened and to deal with the media attention. My company was incredibly supportive, with my boss, Daniel, telling me that he admired how I had handled the situation. "You showed real character," he said. "Not everyone would have had the strength to expose the truth like that." 3 months after the wedding incident, I made a decision that surprised even me. I accepted a job offer from a tech company in Austin, Texas. The opportunity had come up through a professional connection, and the timing felt perfect. I needed a fresh start, away from the memories and the gossip that still followed me around Chicago. Austin offered me a senior director position with a substantial salary increase and the chance to work on cutting-edge artificial intelligence projects. Before I left Chicago, I had one final conversation with my father. He had been trying to reach me for weeks, but I had refused to take his calls. Finally, he showed up at my condo on a Saturday morning, looking older and more defeated than I had ever seen him. "Son," he said, "I know I can't undo what I did, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I destroyed everything that mattered to me, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life." I looked at him, standing there in my doorway, this man who had been my hero for 32 years, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel: pity. "Dad," I said, "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because carrying anger around is exhausting, and I have better things to do with my life." 6 months later, I was settled in Austin, working on projects that challenged me intellectually and surrounded by colleagues who knew nothing about my past except what I chose to share. I had started dating again, taking things slowly and being very careful about trust. The experience had taught me valuable lessons about reading people and recognizing red flags, skills that proved useful both personally and professionally. I heard through my mother that Megan had moved back to Wisconsin to live with her parents, and that my father had taken a job as a sales associate at a small real estate office in the suburbs. Their affair had ended almost immediately after the wedding incident, apparently unable to survive the harsh light of public scrutiny. The scandal that had brought them together had ultimately destroyed them both. The story of my wedding day revenge had become something of a legend in Chicago social circles, but I rarely thought about it anymore. I had moved on to bigger and better things, and the betrayal that had once seemed like the end of the world had actually been the beginning of a new and better life. Sometimes, the most devastating setbacks turn out to be the greatest opportunities for growth and renewal. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.